When Chuck Norris walked into a small town diner, the waitress had no idea her life was about to change until he handed her a note. Seconds later, she was in tears. But before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's a quiet Tuesday afternoon in a modest diner just outside Dallas, Texas. The bell above the door chimes as Chuck steps in wearing a simple denim jacket. In a weathered baseball cap, he's not here for attention, quite the opposite. After a morning of meetings about his latest charity project, he just wants a peaceful lunch away from the cameras and autograph seekers. He chooses a corner table, positioning himself with his back to most of the other customers. The diner is nothing special. Worn leather booths, the smell of coffee and grilled onions in the air, and the soft clinking of plates and silverware creating that familiar American diner symphony. A young black waitress approaches his table, her name tag reading Kesha. Her smile is genuine, her uniform pressed despite the long hours she's clearly been working. She hands him a menu with a warmth that seems to brighten the whole room. Welcome to Betty's Diner, sir. Can I start you off with some coffee? Chuck looks up, expecting that familiar flicker of recognition he's seen thousands of times before, but there's something different in Kesha's eyes. Not the starstruck gaze of a fan, but something deeper, more trouble behind her warm smile. Chuck notices her hands trembling slightly as she holds her notepad, and a piece of paper peeking out from her apron pocket bears what looks like a hospital letterhead. Just black coffee, please. Chuck responds, studying Kesha's face more carefully. Now, in his years of dealing with the public, he's developed a knack for reading people. The exhaustion in her eyes isn't just from a long shift. It's the kind that comes from carrying a heavy burden. Kesha returns with his coffee, pouring it with steady precision. Despite her visible fatigue, are you ready to order, sir? She asks the Zur, coming naturally, respectfully, but without a hint of recognition. Chuck finds himself intrigued. Usually even people try and be discreet, give themselves away. A slight tremor in their voice, an excited glance, a barely suppressed smile, but Kesha's demeanor is genuine, treating him with the same authentic kindness she shows to every customer in the diner. He watches as she moves between tables, her grace never faltering. She helps an elderly man cut his meatloaf when his arthritic hands struggle with the knife. She remembers exactly how the regular at the counter likes his eggs. She even takes a moment to comfort a crying child with a small packet of crackers and a gentle word. But then something catches Chuck's attention as Kesha reaches into her apron for her order pad. A small pill bottle falls to the floor. She quickly snatches it up, her composed expression cracking for just a moment. In that brief instant, Chuck sees something that changes everything. Not just a prescription label, but a glimpse of a burden no young person should have to bear alone. Chuck nurses his coffee, his trained eye catching details most would miss. When Kesha thinks no one is watching, her smile fades, replaced by a weariness that seems to age her well beyond her years between serving customers. She keeps glancing at her phone, each time turning it to her pocket. With shoulders a little more slumped, the lunch rush begins to thin out, and Chuck observes as Kesha steps into a quiet corner near the kitchen. She pulls out that same phone again, this time making a hushed call. Even from his distance, he can hear the strain in her whispered words. Yes, Dr. Williams, the first. Understand? No, I can make the payment by the end of the week. Yes, I'll pick up the new prescription today. I know it's expensive, but she's my mama. Her voice catches on the last word, and she quickly wipes her eyes with her apron before returning to her tables. But now there's a slight tremor in her hands as she refills coffee cups. Her practice smile a little more forced. Chuck watches as she pulls out a worn envelope from her apron, the same one he noticed earlier with the hospital letterhead. Inside, he glimpses a stack of medical bills, the kind that can crush a family's dreams. She's doing quick calculations on a notepad, her expression growing more desperate with each number she writes. The diner's owner, an older woman with Silver hair approaches Kesha with, "Concerned baby girl, why don't you take your break now? I'm fine, Miss Betty Kesha." Insists tucking the bills away mama's. Treatment isn't going to pay for itself. But as she turns to head back to her tables, the envelope slips from her apron. Bills scatter across the floor, and one lands near Chuck's feet before Kesha can reach it. He sees the numbers, the kind of sum that would take years to pay off on a waitress's salary, but it's not the amount that stops him cold. It's the patient's diagnosis on the top of the form, and suddenly Chuck understands why. This young woman's eyes carry the weight of the world as Kesha hurriedly gathers the fallen papers. Chuck makes a decision. He's met thousands of people in his life, signed countless autographs, but something about this young woman's quiet dignity moves him in a way he can't ignore. "Excuse me," he calls softly as she passes his table again. "Could I get some more coffee?" Kesha approaches with the coffee pot, her professional smile back in place despite the redness around her eyes as she pours. Chuck speaks gently. "Sometimes the heaviest burdens are the ones we carry in silence." She pauses mid, caught off guard by his words. For a moment, her carefully maintain composure wavers. "I couldn't help but notice those medical bills." He continues. "They look pretty serious." Kesha straightens, defensive pride crossing her features. "Sir, I don't mean to be rude, but my personal business is your mother's treatments." Chuck interrupts softly. "Stage 3 cancer isn't it?" The coffee pot trembles slightly in her hand. She sets it down carefully, sinking into the seat across from him as if her legs can no longer hold her up. "How did you?" She starts, then shakes her head. "Yes, mama's been fighting it for 8 months now. The doctors say there's a new treatment that could help," but she trails off, looking down at her hands. "But the insurance won't cover it." Chuck finishes for her. "And you're trying to handle it all on your own." Kesha looks up, really seeing him for the first time. "What else can I do? Mama gave up everything to raise me. Right after Daddy passed, worked 3 jobs to put food on our table. Now it's my turn to take care of her." Her voice carries a determination that Chuck recognizes, the same fire he'd had in his own eyes years ago when everyone said a poor boy from Oklahoma could never make it in Hollywood. "What about your own dreams?" he asks, noticing a worn college brochure peeking out alongside the bills in her apron. Kesha's answer and the story behind it would prove to be more extraordinary than Chuck could have imagined. "Dreams?" Kesha lets out a small, bitter laugh. "Those had to wait. I was supposed to start pre-med at Baylor this fall. Full scholarship." Ship her fingers trace patterns on the worn Formica table. "Then mama got sick." Chuck leans forward, his coffee forgotten. "You gave up a full scholarship. Had to. The scholarship wouldn't have covered living expenses, and mama needs me here. Someone has to drive her to treatments, manage her medications." Kesha's voice trails off before strengthening again. "Besides, Miss Betty lets me work double shifts here, and I clean offices at night. Every dollar counts. What does your mother say about all this?" A soft smile crosses Kesha's face. She doesn't know about the scholarship. It would break her heart. She still thinks I'm just taking a gap year to save money. She straightens her apron, squares her shoulders, "But that's okay. God has a plan, right? Maybe medicine wasn't meant to be my path." Chuck studies her face, the same face he'd seen light up while comforting that crying child earlier, the same gentle hands that had helped the elderly man with his meal. "Why medicine?" he asked, though something tells him he already knows the answer. "Growing up in our neighborhood, we didn't have many doctors who looked like us, who understood us." Kesha's eyes take on a distant look. "When I was 12, my best friend Tamama got really sick. By the time her mama could find a clinic that would take their insurance, it was too late." She blinks hard. "I decided right then no other family should have to go through that. Not if I could help it." Just then another customer waves for service. Kesha starts to rise, but Chuck gently touches her arm. "One more question," he says. "If money was an issue, if you could do anything, what would you do?" First, the answer comes without hesitation, her voice barely a whisper. Get Mama into that new treatment program. At MD Anderson, the doctors say it could. Give her a real fighting chance, she manages a small smile. Then maybe, just maybe, think about that. Medical school dream again as Kesha walks away to tend to her other customers. Chuck makes a decision, but first he needs to be sure of something. Something that will determine whether this young woman is truly who she appears to be when Kesha returns to clear his plate. Chuck prepares for his test. He's learned over the years that true character reveals itself not in moments of triumph, but in moments of disappointment and challenge. I hate to tell you this, he be in keeping his voice low and apologetic, but I seem to have misplaced my wallet. I have enough cash for the meal, but he pauses, letting the implication of no tip hang in the air. For a waitress working double shifts to pay medical bills, this would normally be a crushing blow, but Kesha's reaction surprises him. Oh, please don't worry about that, sir. Her smile is genuine, warming her tired eyes. These things happen to everyone. Just make sure you didn't leave it in your car. Lots of folks find it there. Then she does something unexpected. She reaches into her apron and pulls out a small package of cookies. Here, take these for the road. They're left over from our afternoon service, and they're really good with coffee. Chuck watches in amazement as she continues to treat him with the same kindness she'd shown when expecting a tip. Even more telling, he notices her quietly paying for an elderly couple's meal at another table when their own money comes up short. I can't let them go hungry. He overhears her explaining to Miss Betty Mr. Johnson's pension check doesn't come until next week, and you know how proud they are. What Kesha doesn't see is Chuck witnessing this entire exchange. He pulls out a small notebook from his jacket pocket and begins to write the words he puts on that page. Would change not just Kesha's life, but would start a chain reaction that would impact an entire community. As Chuck writes in his notebook memories of his own last flood back, he remembers the people who believed in him when he was just a poor kid from Oklahoma with big dreams, the ones who saw past his circumstances to his potential. Now sitting in this modest diner, he sees that same potential burning bright, and Kesha's eyes. He watches as she moves through the diner, carrying herself with quiet dignity. Despite her exhaustion between tables, she helps a young man practicing job interview responses while he eats his budget breakfast. She splits her own lunch with a homeless veteran who came in seeking shelter from the Texas heat. Miss Betty approaches his table with a fresh pot of coffee. I see you've noticed Arisa, she says softly, that girl's something special. Tell me more. Chuck responds, pen poised over his notebook. Been working here 3 years now, never late, never complains, even after pulling night shifts cleaning offices. She shows up with a smile. Miss Betty's voice swells with pride. When her mom got sick, she could have broken down. Instead, she just worked harder, still finds time to tutor kids at the community center on Sundays. Chuck nods, making his final decision. He pulls out his checkbook, writes carefully, then folds it into the note he's prepared. As he seals both items in an envelope, he thinks about how sometimes God puts us in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. But what Chuck doesn't realize is that his simple act of kindness is about to spark something far bigger than he ever imagined. Chuck leaves the envelope propped against his empty coffee cup, nodding to Miss Betty as he quietly exits the diner. Outside, he pauses for a moment, watching through the window as Kesha approaches his table. She picks up the envelope, assuming it's just another tip, but as she opens it, her hands begin to shake. The note reads, Dear Kesha, I came into this diner looking for a quiet meal, but God had other plans. He wanted me to meet someone who embodies the values I've always believed in: hard work, sacrifice, and unwavering faith. You didn't recognize me as Chuck Norris, and that's okay, because today I got to recognize you for who you are, a young woman with the kind of strength that doesn't come from fists or fighting, but from an unshakable spirit in a servant's Heart, your mother raised you right, and now it's time for you to fulfill the dream she sacrificed so much to nurture. The enclosed check will cover her treatment at MD Anderson and your first year of medical school. Consider it an investment in all the lives you'll touch. As a doctor, remember this moment someday. You'll be in a position to help someone else who's struggling when that day comes. Don't hesitate. That's how we change the world, one act of kindness at a time. God bless you and your mother. Chuck Norris. The check falls from her trembling fingers. Miss Betty picks it up, and her gasp fills the quiet diner. The amount written there, $200,000, would indeed cover both the innovative cancer treatment and a year of medical school. Kesha collapses into the nearest chair, tears streaming down her face. The other waitresses gather around her as she reads the note again and again. Through her tears, she looks toward the door, but Chuck is already gone. What she doesn't know is that this is just the beginning, because sometimes a single act of kindness can trigger a wave of change that touches not just one life, but an entire community. Over the next 3 months, Kesha's life transforms in ways she never imagined possible. Her mother begins the groundbreaking treatment at MD Anderson, and the doctors are amazed by her response to cancer. Begins to retreat, and color returns to her mother's cheeks, but Chuck's generosity sparks something even bigger. When the local news picks up the story, it touches hearts across Texas. Other restaurant patrons, inspired by Chuck's example, start leaving larger tips for their servers. Some even create scholarship funds for working students. Kesha continues working at the diner, even after enrolling in pre-med courses. These people are my family, she explains. To anyone who asks, they stood by me during my darkest hours. Miss Betty turns one corner of the diner into a wall of dreams where struggling students can post their goals and needs. Local business owners and customers regularly check the wall, offering help where they can. It becomes a place where hope grows and miracles happen. One morning, Kesha finds an envelope from Chuck's foundation. Inside is a note explaining that her mother's entire treatment is now covered and her medical school education will be fully funded, but there's a catch. She has a promise to help another student in need when she becomes a doctor. Your story started a movement. The note reads, people around here are remembering what community really means. Keep that spirit alive. Kesha stands in the diner where it all began, touching the letter with trembling fingers, but she has no idea that the biggest surprise is still to come. 3 years past. Kesha is now in her second year of medical school, excelling in her studies while still finding time to volunteer at free clinics. Her mother, now in a remission, beams with pride at her daughter's accomplishments. One Saturday morning, Kesha is volunteering at a community health fair she helped organize. The event provides free health screenings for underserved neighborhoods. Her way of paying forward the blessing she received as she checks a young child's blood pressure. A familiar figure appears in the doorway. Chuck Norris walks in, looking exactly as he did that day in the diner. This time, though, Kesha knows exactly who he is. I had to come see for myself, he says, smiling warmly. Miss Betty keeps me updated on your progress. Ka tries to speak, but tears fill her eyes instead. Without a word, she wraps her arms around the man who changed her life. The embrace speaks volumes about gratitude, about faith, about dreams fulfilled. You know, Chuck says, looking around at the health fair, I only gave you the means. You're the one who made all this happen. He gestures to the room full of volunteer medical students, the grateful patients, the community coming together. What started as one act of kindness has multiplied into hundreds of lives touched. Actually, Kesha responds, wiping her eyes, you gave me something more important than money. You gave me back my hope, and that's what I'm trying to give to others now. Chuck nods, understanding perfectly, because sometimes the greatest strength isn't in fighting battles, it's in helping others fight theirs. Today, that small diner outside Dallas has become a symbol of hope to wall of. Dreams that started in one corner now covers an entire wall filled with stories of dreams fulfilled and lives. Change Kesha is set to graduate medical school next spring, already accepted into a residency program at a hospital, serving underprivileged communities. Her mother healthy and strong volunteers at cancer support groups, sharing her story of faith and recovery. But perhaps the most powerful legacy isn't in the big moments, it's in the small acts of kindness that happen every day, like how Casey uses her study breaks to mentor high school students interested in medicine, or how she started a foundation that helps families navigate medical bills and insurance claims. You know what amazes me most, Chuck says during one of his regular visits to the diner, it's not just about the money anymore, it's about people remembering who we are as Americans, folks who help each other out, who lift each other up. The place has become more than just a restaurant. It's where people come not just for food, but for hope. Every table has a story, every customer a chance to be part of something bigger than themselves. And if you look closely, you might see Kesha's original note from Chuck framed on the wall below, and she's added her own message. Sometimes angels wear cowboy boots and denim jackets. Sometimes miracles happen over coffee, and sometimes God sends exactly who we need, exactly when we need them. So always remember, we're all part of someone else's miracle. We just have to be brave enough to act when God puts an opportunity in front of us. If you've been touched by this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. God bless you all, and I'll see you in the next video.